So hello, everybody. Welcome and thank you for joining us today. We're going to be sharing with you the challenges, strategies employed, and the lessons that we learned during a 12-month replatform of va.gov to Drupal 8. My name is Jeff Brower. I head up operations and delivery at Agile 6. Agile 6 is a service-disabled, veteran-owned small business and the founder of the Digital Services Coalition, pioneering work in civic tech and committed to building a better citizen-centered government. I'm joined today by my esteemed colleagues and friends, Ryan Sibley, content strategist for Nava PBC, and Jeff Barnes from the VA Office of the CTO, who will take us through an overview of our project and the main drivers behind it now.
Good afternoon. My name is Jeff Barnes. I'm the deputy for the digital experience product line with VA's Office of the CTO. At the time we completed this project, I was with the US Digital Service as a digital services expert. The Drupal implementation that we did was for the Department of Veterans Affairs with the support of the Digital Service and VHA's Digital Media Office. That's the Veterans Health Administration. We had an incredible partnership with our contractor team, which included Agile 6, Nava, and Civic Actions, Jeff just mentioned. We set out to build a Drupal 8 instance for va.gov, which is VA's flagship property. For the last several years, VA has been attempting to modernize many of our most critical veteran-facing digital products to increase the use of self-service tools, reduce the time veterans spend waiting to hear back from VA, and to improve the veteran experience. We're doing all this in alignment with the vision set out by the VA CTO in 2017. I'm going to hand it over to Ryan to outline some of our challenges.
Hi, I'm Ryan. I'm a senior content strategist with Nava PBC. For context, Nava is a public benefit corporation that partners with government agencies to deliver mission-critical software that helps public institutions earn people's trust. I'm going to take just a minute to introduce the challenges we faced on this project, and then we'll go into more detail. There were three major challenges that we faced. Jeff Barnes is going to talk about serving multiple user groups. Then I'm going to talk about the challenges managing and implementing communication and governance for all of those groups. Jeff Brower is going to talk about the technical challenges that can occur when trying to balance the delivery of an MVP content model for a single product while considering the entire site content at the same time. Jeff Barnes, back to you.
Thank you. Our first challenge is serving the multiple user groups and stakeholder groups that are inherent in any government Drupal implementation. In a place as big as VA, and I imagine it's true of organizations of any size, you start with trying to balance delivery timeline with the scalability and maturity of the product. We knew that actually replatforming va.gov would take us years, so where do we start? Definitely not with a year of requirements gathering or a year of authoring experience work, and definitely not with a one-to-one migration of thousands of pages. So we decided early on that we couldn't afford the time to battle every administration, the business lines, the offices, about which of their content would migrate and by when. If our plan was to deliver real value to each of our three key user groups within the first few months, and then end up with something we could hang our hat on in the end of the first year, how do we do it? So the veterans experience was our top priority, followed by the CMS editor community creating content for those veterans, and then finally the business offices that rely on va.gov. With a small team and limited funding, we focused on building an MVP. We were ambitious, focused, and had a talented team. So what did we do? We panicked. We started to analyze the VA ecosystem, which we found in hundreds of thousands of pages. How do we build a content model for that? We wanted to make a better facility site, but VA has almost 150 medical systems and thousands of outpatient and benefit facilities. We wanted to make the business happy, but VA has over 350,000 employees and just as many opinions. So as good designers, we went back to our core and we asked, how might we? We asked ourselves what really mattered to each of our user groups and how could we do it? What MVP criteria would get them the most value in the first year? We concluded that we had to ship both an MVP CMS that did a little bit of everything and a few representative products that delivered value and give Drupal a public face at VA. Launching that MVP of the decoupled CMS was no small undertaking. We had to show a lot in each of our areas to prove each layer of the new CMS would work for VA. So we did this, we wanted to be confident before we committed the organization to a large-scale migration to Drupal. So what products did we actually build for our users? For the veterans, we targeted the most relevant information for planning a medical center visit, like parking. We standardized our national health services, and we built a series of benefit hubs, excuse me. This took tons of user research to build, and it was difficult to make these products fit the veterans' needs. For the VA editors, we got them into a not quite out-of-the-box Drupal editor experience. We asked them for their top priority features, and we did incremental improvement as content moved into Drupal. For the business, we built an outreach and events hub, and we implemented a create once, publish everywhere model for managing those national health services. We picked a few of the high visibility, large impact products and not a mass migration of every feature, service, or organization in the MVP launch. Even with that thin slice, it felt a lot like this. Everyone gets a car. To attempt to accomplish this, we did a few key things. We had to split into multiple delivery teams, one focused on veteran products and one on CMS as a product for editors. We had to constantly prioritize and scope our MVP with 2 full-time dedicated VA product owners. Those VA product owners brought everything we did back to a VA governance committee to get feedback and help our stakeholders stay involved without allowing them direct access to the development team for requirements. We kept our editors' features, support, and training lightweight, and the initial editor community was small, which allowed us to collect user feedback and make incremental improvements to that experience. I'm happy to say that we did actually ship all those things that I described, but not without heartache. Here's what we learned about serving all these user groups. Getting a stable CMS to work for the editors is not the same problem as getting a great product into the hands of the end users. Doing it at the same time with the same team was extremely taxing. By not promising the business that we would be ready out of the box with all of the authoring experience features they wanted, we bought time to get it to production and test it with real editors. We didn't expect our team to solve for every use case before we shipped products that worked for some. We took a small team and focused on our 3 user groups without getting distracted by a mountain of business needs. We showed the VA a vision of moving content to Drupal responsibly by shipping something that works now in the first year. Today, we've proven that Drupal can be balanced across the spectrum of veteran, editor, and business owner needs. We're starting to scale as we expected. We're moving dozens of medical centers, hundreds of pages of veteran content, and we're onboarding new editors every day. Ryan's now going to walk us through our next challenge.
Hello again. I'm going to talk now about how we handled comms and governance. And I just want to make a comment about how even though we're on Zoom and it's virtual, it still feels like we're live and in person. Same nerves attack you. It's a funny thing. Anyway, so will the entire site and all of my stakeholders need to migrate to Drupal at once? This wasn't as much a question as it was a worry. We had a lot of work to do to help bring people on board. One of the first challenges one of the persistent challenges we faced was that the decoupled architecture confused users. Previously, when users pushed publish, that's what happened. Their content was published. But in this case, the site had to be updated in order for the published content to go live. What that also meant was people were nervous about not being able to unpublish things put up by accident. People were also worried that they wouldn't be able to publish urgent content if they needed to. For context, this is the front end of the new website. This is a screenshot of the CMS during research. It was hard for people to grasp that there would be a delay between what they put into the CMS and what they saw on the website. Again, the lag also caused anxiety around what would happen if they needed to put content up in a hurry or take something off of the website quickly. If you're interested in this problem, there's a session tomorrow that will talk more about this. It's called Benefits and Pitfalls of Integrating Drupal into a Decoupled Static Site. Decoupled Static Site Build Process for VA.gov. The next slide is actually just a screenshot of that, that session. Okay. Another challenge, people were no longer going to have complete control. We also faced a communications problem. The governance model was shifting to one that allowed content to be edited by people with the proper permissions, and those people might not work at the hospital for the website they were editing. For instance, someone at central office might now be responsible for a specific piece of content on a hospital site and be able to make determinations about what content will go live or not. You can imagine the anxiety that could cause. Also, now that more people were going to be able to author the site, that meant more people would need training. We had to design trainings and make sure the right people were able to take them. That said, some people did really like not having to worry about maintaining all of their content anymore. The new setup streamlined content. We decreased total site pages from 300 down to 40 and cut the total word count from 350,000 to just 46,000. That's a lot. This made people nervous. We got rid of a lot of content. Our content model didn't accommodate content about unique programs or collaborations a single facility might have. For instance, the Pittsburgh Medical Center contained information for a housing program that served all veterans across the US. The Pittsburgh VA website had a special place for it. The new content model and redesigned front end didn't have room for it. In most cases, this was fine. People were happy to get rid of bloated or outdated content. However, in others, we had to create special pages to feature what was considered special content. Figuring it all out required us to do lots of audits and reviews. We needed feedback from a distributed user base of CMS users outside of VA's central office. We needed to know if they could use the CMS as it was designed. We needed to know if the content model we built fit their needs. We needed to know if the governance system we were designing would work for them. However, getting time with people was difficult. These people are running hospitals and providing healthcare and support to veterans. Our work wasn't always their priority. Our MVP was also our pilot, and that meant that we needed to work closely with the stakeholders at Pittsburgh to help them trim content, etc. For instance, when we were working with the people at Pittsburgh VA Hospital, we used copyducts at first to have them review and approve new content for their new website. But we learned this wouldn't work. The copyduct process was too cumbersome for them. So we pivoted to meet our clients where they were. In this case, working sessions with straightforward Word docs worked best. So for strategies to help us mitigate our challenges, we used playbooks and guides, and we established a working group to address our challenges. We use playbooks and guides to convey the CMS's value proposition and to empower and support our users. The playbooks and guides we created helped us communicate the value being delivered by the new website and the CMS. It also worked to help stakeholders understand why content was being organized the way it was, and why people outside of their hospital would be putting content on their website. One thing the playbooks helped with was explaining the tiered content governance system we set up. The playbook communicated how the system would help organize and prioritize content, and helped justify removing content and reassigning permissions. This slide details the 3 tiers that were created, but because it's so specific to the product, I won't go into it. We organized the governance working group to help us mitigate risks, gain insights into user needs, and understand training needs. We established a governance working group at the beginning so we could learn from their experiences doing similar things in the past, and to create buy-in for the new products we were building. The group also helped us create and test the trainings that we provided for people at the hospitals. The governance working group helped us make it all happen. If we couldn't cut back content, our new site design and content models wouldn't work. They helped us limit that risk by working with us on things like the tiers I showed you in the last slide. So other things we did, or other things we learned that creating a charter that assigns responsibilities to refer back to when there's uncertainty can be your North Star. We learned that we should create strategies that allow your stakeholders and SMEs to work with you easily and limit churn. I want to reiterate that sunsetting cherished content can be tough for stakeholders, yet we know that proliferation of content across multiple web properties is one risk we tackled frequently in the working group. Redundant content means that veterans have a tough time finding the single source of truth about their benefits. By focusing on our charter, or why we're here, a North Star, we were able to get past attachment to content and focus on the veteran experience. For people at the VA, their #1 job is aiding veterans in their healthcare journeys. Our job was to make it easy for them to do that job even better. Now I'll pass it over to Jeff Brower, who's going to talk about the technical challenges that can occur when trying to balance the delivery of an MVP content model for a single product while considering the entire site content at the same time. Jeff?
Awesome, thanks, Ryan. So the last which you're all here to find an answer is, how do I build a content model that can both launch quickly and will scale? The challenge before us was that the long-term future of the Drupal CMS was to power all public-facing products for VA.gov. But to start, we were only building the one product, the VA Medical Center. Our product owner and key stakeholders wanted the team to focus the content model on just the VA Medical Center because time to market is important, and through our agile methodology, the theory is we can always iterate. Our content strategists, on the other hand, wanted to consider the entirety of the VA.gov ecosystem and create a global content model inside of which the VAMC would fit neatly. Because getting the model 95% right the first time will enable some scalability and a faster path of migration for other products. So what did we do? We wound up building an MVP content model. Because time was of the essence. We performed a very short period of preliminary research across a few VAMCs on the most likely reusable content types. We developed the content model based on the information we knew about VAMC Pittsburgh, plus some educated guesses based on that preliminary research. We also used components, and more specifically paragraphs, that can be reused across content types and across products. But when our confidence was low in the final structure of what that would be, we fell back onto using WYSIWYG. So what's the first lesson we learned? In large government organizations, we're not going to always know the full scope of products Drupal will need to support. We certainly didn't. So plan to iterate. But let's be honest, iteration is a nice way of saying refactoring. And refactoring is inevitable when taking a thin slice product-based approach, as Jeff had talked about earlier. So here's what we found iteration looked like on a content model on the ground, and specifically in a decoupled world. It means that there is additional work for teams across the stack. So minimizing the amount of it as much as possible is important. Iteration on a single content type could mean backend engineers need to create new fields and migrate content. Content writers need to develop new standards and write modified content. Designers may need to tweak the display, both in the CMS as well as in the front-end user-facing product. Front-end engineers, of course, then need to update templates according to the new data structure and design. And then even your help desk folks and your training teams, they'll need to update user guides and training documentation. So, too much change can create frustrated or confused editors because iteration changes in CMS changes the way editors actually create and modify their content. So, and as Sarah mentioned in the keynote earlier today, considering the user experience is critical to a successful product. So we tried to minimize refactoring as much as possible by keeping reusability top of mind. And in particular, for the most frequently used content types across products, we found those to be news releases, stories, events, and profiles. And as I mentioned earlier, we utilized a component-based model to maximize their reuse. Another key lesson we learned, finding the right balance of product scope for the MVP by looking for the smallest sample size that also contains representation across key differentiators. So what does that mean? In our case, our MVP consisted of only one hospital site for our VA Medical Center. But in retrospect, we probably built out a few centers that varied across key differentiators like geography, because the needs of rural veterans differ than the needs of veterans in more urban areas. Or differentiators like the type of center, like vet centers offer different services and operate differently than VA medical centers. Had we done all this, we would have been able to harden those key aspects of the model up front and incurred less technical debt. For those unfamiliar with the term content model hardening, so when I said we often relied on the usage of WYSIWYG editor when we didn't have confidence in the content structure, hardening would be to take that WYSIWYG content and structure it into reusable components. So our concrete example in what I'm sharing on the screen here, I'm sharing our health services that are offered at a specific hospital location. The local content for the building location, the phone number and hours, all of that was originally built in WYSIWYG. And right now we're actually going through the process to structure that content into field sets so it can be reused across the site. But that's happening right now at the same time another team is attempting to migrate the next set of medical centers to Drupal. Oy vey. So our next lesson, and this may be the most important one, content is king. Once our scope is right-sized to fit the thin slice of the organization, do as deep a dive on the content as time will allow. and do it first before the design. So our challenge was that for most of our work, the front end veteran facing design was created before we had defined the content model to support it. This meant that the Drupal team was building CMS components without a full understanding of the level of reuse they might have or flexibility they would need. So in doing so, we were incurring technical debt. We also didn't know what content existed to support those designs. So since the auditing and writing was happening afterwards, it created a rework for engineers later when the content model was actually created and refined. Had we built out that content model first, before the veteran-facing design was developed, through research, we would have learned what content users needed most. Through the audit of the existing content, we would have known upfront what we have and want to keep, what we didn't need, and then the gaps in the content we'd have to write. We could then have spent a little time validating and tweaking our content design hypothesis across a few other representative sites that vary on those key differentiators I mentioned. So then once we'd have that content model documented and validated, that same specification could have been provided to the cross-functional team of content writers, engineers, designers to actually begin product development at the same time and on the exact same page. In a CMS-driven site, content has to be the driver of product development, not an afterthought. And finally, a lesson on team structure. We learned that after we proved out Drupal as the new content source of truth for some of VA.gov products, it was time to scale, right? And so as more products have now rolled on since the launch, we've learned quickly that it's absolutely critical to involve early on a central Drupal team who owns the global content model, especially this is the case in a decoupled architecture. So we have since formed a dedicated product support team, including a product manager, content strategist, and several Drupal engineers. And by virtue of having visibility into new product requirements early, this team is able to get ahead of any potential issues across products and understand the implications of any content model change. So then this team can advise the other product teams that they support about any upcoming front-end refactoring that may be coming their way. So that was a lot. We know that doing what we did was hard. Even so, we know that we delivered a good and needed product. And if you're taking on a difficult job like this one, we recommend that you take a product-focused approach, be content first in your design and development process, set expectations with stakeholders early on in the process and keep them in the loop throughout, and of course, deliver quickly and iterate. Thank you all for your time and attention. We'll now shift into Q&A.
Hey, thanks so much for the presentation, y'all. I have a quick question. So from your perspective, what are some of the biggest challenges that you face now that it's up and running?
I'll answer part of that one. Thanks for the question, Clarence. So I think that it's interesting because this presentation is capturing a time period which is kind of in the past, right? It's the first year of a multi-year project, and we're almost through the second year. I think that the things that are the biggest challenge now is that we kind of caught the car a little bit. So now VA wants us to scale Drupal to work for many, many, many more use cases that we didn't solve for in the MVP. And so that I think Jeff Brower touched on that a bit with what does it really mean to iterate on a content model, and the challenges that come along with doing that. And so as we expand to these substantially larger number of use cases, we're trying to figure out how much to invest in analysis versus building the next big thing that needs to be launched. I think that's the biggest ongoing challenge.
Great. I think I see a couple of maybe one or two questions in the chat. Should we go through those? Jason Weekly asked, am I hearing you say the site was launched into a sort of public beta, essentially running the legacy app side by side with the new?
Yeah, I think Kevin answered that one in the chat already, actually.
Oh, did he? Okay.
Yeah, so he mentioned it, but we did sort of a dual state soft launch where there was a redirect between the existing site. select here to move over to the new version, and then we eventually did turn off the other Pittsburgh Healthcare website.
I think that Jason's question about whether or not this was something veterans could use is an interesting one, because the ultimate goal was to improve the UX for veterans, but the CMS was very much not veteran facing. You want to talk about that a little bit, Jeff Barnes?
Yeah, the CMS editor community is VA employees and VA contractors only. We did not explore the concept of having content that was submitted in any other ways as part of this work.
Right, but we always view our work, even the CMS work, as serving veterans, because the easier we can make it for the VA to get their content out there, the more we're going to be able to help our veterans access that content. So, Tim asks, are there plans for the content models to be used or consumed by entities besides va.gov, the website? And if so, what challenges is that posing for your process?
Very topical, Tim. Yes. So we always kind of had in mind, and going into the decision making on whether we should build a decoupled, the headless, progressively coupled discussion, was always, okay, we're building a content API, but what are the other use cases? What happens when we want to build a VA mobile app? What happens when we want, third parties to be able to consume our eligibility content and display it on their website? And so those use cases have been theorized, but we haven't expanded to this being used anywhere other than va.gov. We've done a little bit of experimentation with the developer.va.gov portal, which is sometimes referred to as Lighthouse at VA. But that's sort of a public API program, and we've experimented with sending them data from the CMS, and we're going to probably continue that trend of trying to expose more things publicly.
Okay, great.
It looks like, yeah, go ahead, Kelsey.
Oh yeah, hi. I just had a quick question about doing D7 to D8 migrations when you're putting content first and doing iterations of changes. If you're working with a smaller team as a business analyst, how can you dive into content better and still have open communication with your client while the changes are occurring?
Ryan, you want to take that?
Yeah, Kelsey, do you mind restating the first part?
Yeah, so we're doing a D7 to D8 migration, and we have a lot of content from our government client that has to be migrated over. We're going into a soft launch in September, end of September, and I just wanted to know, you talked about not boiling the ocean when you're doing requirements gathering and having communication with QA and design and UAT. So how do you kind of focus in on one particular thing and kind of keep them in the loop while all this is happening?
Well, so Jeff Brower talked a lot about content is king and starting with content. So in this case, it sounds, well, and I don't want to assume what you've done or haven't done, but it sounds like you'd want to start with, like you said, a deep dive into your content and doing a content audit and understanding how people are using each piece of content before you make decisions about what would be migrated and what you even need to design a content model for. Does that?
Yeah, that answers my question. Thank you,
Yeah.
Ryan.
Oh, you're welcome. I mean, there's a lot more. I think there are a lot more things that you could do to get started with this. But yeah, before you do anything technical at all, it's probably looking at everything your partner has and looking at analytics, et cetera, and then going into content modeling before you even start the migration.
Awesome. Thanks, Ryan.
You're welcome.
I think there were two similar questions, one from Joe Mildenberger and another from Steve Longo about, when deciding on which content and how much content would be part of the MVP, was it difficult to sell to stakeholders? And how did you get buy-in on the content model with stakeholders who are new to Drupal and don't really fully understand the importance? Actually, so maybe those are two different.
Well, they're sort of related. So I mentioned in my part of the presentation that some people didn't mind getting rid of content. And the stakeholders at the hospital, really, they were those folks. They really didn't mind. They knew that their website was bloated and there was a lot of redundant content. And so they absolutely had no problem with us trimming. The most difficult part was making sure that as we were trimming and rewriting that, that we were accurate in doing so. So that's where like the working together came into play, which was difficult. But we did have some trouble, I think, trimming content from other parts of the website of va.gov. There was content that maybe wasn't directly related to the veteran experience, which people felt, very attached to. And that's when our charter and our North Star really came into play. Like, we had to remember who we were doing things for, and getting rid of content or rearranging content to benefit them. So I don't know, I'm rambling a little bit. I'm not sure if I've exactly answered the questions, but it depended. We had so many different groups of stakeholders here. So, and each group had different focuses or priorities and different responsibilities. So it was definitely a delicate balance.
Yeah, I think, Ryan, that those are some good points. And I would add to that sort of a level up from the example of building a medical center website. We had to convince the entire department, what we should tackle with the MVP of Drupal. And, there was the entire health administration, the benefits administration, the cemeteries administration, and then all VA central offices. And so we talked a little bit about having that sort of steering committee as part of the web governance board, but what we didn't allow them to do was what the natural government knee-jerk reaction is, which is, well, let's make sure we talk to everybody and spend 6 years, 6 months to a year gathering requirements to understand what everyone needs out of the new CMS. And instead, we picked a high priority product from each of those groups that we thought was representative and would be something we could scale. And we tried to deliver that to them to show them that Drupal would work. And yes, it was very difficult to convince them that we're not wholesale migrating big sections of their work, but we're actually also modernizing the content and modernizing the user experience at the same time.
And I think there was a lot of messaging around, with Drupal, we were able to implement governance. And so we had to do a lot of communication around the effort of trying to deduplicate content, right? Publish it once. Jeff had mentioned the core model, I believe, right? Create once, publish everywhere. And that there were certain messages that were important that the central office control, because it only really needed to be said once. And so our health services taxonomy is an example of that, where we wanted to centralize the language around like the specific health services, right? What does, optometry mean to the VA? And rather than having each individual facility put their variation on it, we centralized that control and then allowed the regions and then the local facilities to have other layers of content to add on top of that. What was very specific about Pittsburgh's offering in optometry. And then below that, for the very specific hospital locations, well, where is optometry offered? What is the contact information? How do I get there? All that. So we created, we kind of educated the business on the benefits of a tiered and distributed content model.
We have some support from Kevin answering a few of the questions in the chat. So
yes, thanks, Kevin.
Thank you.
Kevin Walsh is our product manager. Are there?
I responded to Jason privately.
Okay.
If there's anything that should be in the recording, then make sure to repeat it out loud.
Nope.
Sure. Are people raising hands? If so, I don't see where that is happening. But
no, the session was recording. Yeah, it records directly to the cloud.
Was there a question by Tim Cosgrove that got answered?
It was answered. Yes, thank you.
Yes,
Okay.
all the way up. You can feel free to ask your questions out loud. That might be easier.
There's a question about training. What time frame did we set up for training? 3 weeks, 5 weeks? Maybe Jeff Brower can take that one.
What was the time frame for training? Well, we were getting editors into the CMS as early as possible, right? Again, because we were working with a small group. I think Jeff Barnes, you mentioned this. So training for the initial product itself was working with a really small, because we were working with only the one site, we had only 2 folks that were actually going to be in the CMS for the VAMC product. The formal training, yeah, was probably in that time frame. We would go through, we'd modularize it and roll it out in chunks so as not to overwhelm them. But for this case, because we were actively developing the product at the same time as giving access to the editors to begin getting their content into the site, it was probably more elongated than it will be for the future medical centers that are rolling on. So there's kind of there are distinct differences for when you're building out the MVP product and piloting your initial site at the same time.
There's another question from Kelsey asking.
Okay. Oh, did we run into questions or issues with reusable paragraphs and content migration?
Yeah, that question.
That one. So when we say content migration, I want to be really explicit here that we did not script content migrating from TeamSite into Drupal. So everything was manually rewritten and into Drupal directly by hand. You got it. That was, but we the bigger lift was actually taking the 400 something pages that existed and trying to bring that down into 45. The getting it into the site was less of a
I'll just say I was just going to say we had a lot of writers helping us with this, and even the writers who didn't originally write the content had trouble cutting it. You know what I mean? How can we leave all of this on the floor? You know, it was an emotional thing.
For the medical centers we're migrating now, though, there is scripting involved. It's not just all manual work.
Okay. Great. All right, it is 3:08. I think we have just a couple more minutes. If there are any other questions. Jeff, question, do you anticipate each medical center having a similar setup, having to move from 400 to 45 pages?
Yes. So what we did was not, and this kind of gets back to the original part of this. Like we didn't migrate from the team site 400 pages to Drupal 45 pages in sort of a scripted manner where we artificially deleted, 355 pages, right? We completely redesigned and created a veteran-focused website using the VA design system and following the VA style guide, and rewrote it in plain language and prioritized national content and created national versus local service listings. And it was a complete redesign. So what we're doing is we're now going through and migrating all the other medical centers from that model that was 400 pages to the model that is 45 pages. And much of that content doesn't have to be rewritten site to site because it's a national level service description, or it's the general information about how a particular service works in all the facilities. And then there's local content that does need to be tailored within each medical center or within each facility site. Yeah.
feel like we need some background music to fill the silence between questions. All right. Thanks, Ralph. Ariel, if there's nothing else, we can wrap up.
Thank you, everyone, for joining.
Nice work.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank
Thanks.
you. Thank you.
Yay.
Thanks, everyone.